Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. And here we are in this new virtual world where we have to greet people in every time zone, right? My name is David Violet. I will be presenting to you on what I call your successful multilingual event. I will be talking about, yes, ILR, the International Association of Conference Interpreters, of which I am the chair for the United States chapter. I'll also be talking a little bit about my own um, career path, and I will also be talking a lot about your successful event. I would like to give you some advice on how to make sure that your event is a success when you are using interpreters. So here I am, member of ILR, and I am based in the San Francisco area in California. I'd like to go over my career a little bit. I started after my studies. I worked as a conference interpreter in Paris for about 2 years. Here you can see something when I was working at the European Commission. Here's a picture of the Commission. Then um, after Paris, I decided, after 2 years working as a conference interpreter in Paris, I missed my country, the United States. I went back to Washington, D.C., where I worked as a freelance interpreter for about 6 years. Got a little bit um, the feeling that I needed to move on and do something else, and I decided to get into United Nations peacekeeping. I worked in Rwanda for the United Nations peacekeeping mission there. Here I am being evacuated from Rwanda. I'm here interpreting for the head of that mission, for the president of Ghana, and here I am walking with General Romeo Dallaire, who was our force commander, on our way back to Kigali for ceasefire talks. And after Rwanda, I moved on and started doing peacekeeping in Angola. Here I am interpreting for the head of the mission, the SRSG. You can see it's Portuguese in Angola. And then after that, I decided to keep doing some peacekeeping and went to Kosovo. When you get involved in field missions like this, sometimes they ask you to do things way above your pay grade. And I ended up being the municipal administrator, essentially the mayor for two cities, Glagovac and Podujevo, and in that capacity I actually performed the first marriage in Kosovo since the war. That was in 1999, and that's me next to the man in the white shirt. So after Kosovo, I went back to Paris, worked as a conference interpreter for 5 years. Thank goodness I also joined ILR. And thank goodness for many reasons, but in particular because somebody called me from The Hague and I went there. They found me in the directory. We have a directory for ILR. The International Association of Conference Interpreters has its directory of members that you can always look into when you are looking for an interpreter. And somebody had found me in there and they ended up hiring me for a year there at The Hague, which was nice. After that, I went back to California and taught for a couple of years at the what was then called the Monterey, now the Mulberry Institute of Studies, Middlebury, sorry. And then I went for a sabbatical for 5 years in Buenos Aires, and then I decided to come back to San Francisco, and that's where I have been since 2013. You can use this QR code to look up my website if you would like. I will be using a lot of QR codes to refer you to articles and things so you can get your camera ready and take these pictures and use them later to look up things on the internet. One last picture, that's me interpreting for the French President François Hollande in 2014 when he came for a visit. So enough about me. I'd like now to move on and talk about your successful multilingual event. And to do so, I'm going to cover a little bit the history of conference interpreting. Now, I'd like to see if we are all in the chat. I am going to type something in there. I'm going to say hello. I'd like to be able to communicate with you a little bit through the chat. Can people see me? Can you see the chat there? I'm not seeing anybody. Okay, I see David is saying yes, yes. I see a few people. Well, lovely, lovely. I see some people. Okay, good. Then I would like to start asking from time to time some questions. Um, can somebody tell me where this is? Anybody want to write it in the chat? Can you take a guess where that may be? Right, right, Versailles. So that is the Palace of Versailles, and that is a picture taken during the 1919 um, peace negotiations or the peace talks after World War I. At that conference, it was very notable because until that time, generally speaking, I'm speaking pretty much as a layman, pretty generalities, but up until that time, most diplomatic interpreting discussions were held in French. But after the First World War, the English, obviously, and the Americans were very prominent, and they wanted to have English as well. So here they did interpretation between French and English, and they did so consecutively, which means that one person will speak, and then the interpreter will interpret, and everyone waits for the next person to speak. Here we have sort of a timeline where you could see here's the Versailles Conference, 1919. Later, they started trying, you could see simultaneous in the green, simultaneous interpreting sort of got off to a partial start with the International Labor Organization in 1927, but apparently the results were not really satisfactory, and people continued pretty much along, as the blue line shows, in consecutive for many more years. It was when the Nuremberg trials came that the need for simultaneous was so great, because in consecutive, if you have to wait every time and you have several languages, let's say somebody's, the prosecutor asks the witness, could you please tell us what happened? And the witness now speaks in, let's say, German. That's going to be interpreted into English while everyone who understood the German waits. And then it will be interpreted into French while the two other linguistic groups wait, and that triples the amount of time taken. So they were quite adamant about having simultaneous. So here is the courtroom, and there are the interpreters. And you can see that the interpreters are using electronic equipment. They are doing simultaneous interpretation, and this is generally considered the first time that simultaneous interpretation was used on a large scale and quite successfully. So here we have our timeline. We have the first United Nations General Assembly, which was just the next year, 1946. And there was one more attempt to use consecutive, and apparently they realized how cumbersome it was. And from then on, it's pretty much been in simultaneous when we are referring to conference interpreting. And that's what we will be talking about today, is conference interpreting. AIKE was created in 1953. It was a huge success to create it because there had been several regional organizations, and AIKE emerged as the one universal organization. And today, it now includes all countries of the world. A little bit more about conference interpreting. Here is the United Nations Security Council, and you can see the interpreters up here on the wall. They have a bird's eye view, and they are doing simultaneous interpreting there with modern equipment. You can see that they have a good view. They need to be able to see and to have excellent sound, and we will be delving into that a little bit as we go. That's for the big institutions, right? The United Nations, the European Union, etc. But there are hundreds of small events taking place all the time. Actually, these in-person events are not taking place because of the pandemic, but you will often see that in the very back of a large meeting room in a hotel, you'll see the interpreters on the side or in the back doing simultaneous interpreting like that. So AIKE was started, as I said, in 1953. It has gotten interpreters organized, and I'm going to show you a little bit about the organization. I don't think, I'm sorry that it is mainly in French. You have the assembly every 3 years that adopts the program and the rules and all of our code of ethics, etc., for the following year. The executive committee. I'd like to point out just a couple of other things, otherwise it's not all that interesting. You have 23 regions, and these 23 regions are all over the world, and according to the number of people. So the United States is a region. On the other hand, some other areas where they have less interpreters per country, for example, South America, Africa, and Asia, they are called by those names. So you have actually the South American region. You also have actually the Brazilian region because it has enough interpreters to have its own region, etc. And then in Europe, where you have a high concentration of IEK interpreters, you see generally it's divided by countries. So you have Austria, France, Italy, etc. These are the regions, and I am the chair for the United States region. What does IEK do? IEK works with interpreters and with all of the organizers, with the conference organizers and the technicians, etc., to make sure that conference interpreting works well. It defines various conditions. For example, the quality of sound, the placement of the interpreter, etc. It negotiates with major bodies if those bodies wish. Some major international institutions decide to have their HR department negotiate individually with each interpreter. Some say, hey, that's a lot of work, a lot of expense. We will negotiate with IEK and we will accept their conditions as representatives of all conference interpreters who are going to work with us. IEK conducts research, which has been very important lately because of the recent phenomenon of more and more auditory injuries to interpreters due to remote, and we will be looking into that further. But there's a lot of research going on about market trends, about the best pedagogy, etc. And IEK supports all of the university programs that do teach conference interpreting. It promotes a code of ethics, which is essential to the functioning of conference interpreting. One of the main pillars of our code of ethics is confidentiality. Of course, this is true for any interpreter, whether you are a member of IEK or not. You absolutely must keep secret what you hear. You are there to give linguistic support, and obviously you are not there to go out and talk about it afterwards. And this is an ironclad rule. Any interpreter who starts talking a little bit too much will lose all of his or her clients, and as well as the respect of the other interpreters. And we also educate clients and the public about all of these things, about the best way to teach, about the best equipment to use, about the way to organize your conference room, etc. And that's sort of what we are doing today. I'd like to jump ahead to our recent past, March 2020. Let's see if my little video works and you get some sound. I guess not. I'm not getting any sound. Well, what happened was the virus hit. And as for all of you, this was a sea change for interpreting, because all on-site meetings, all in-person meetings, such as this one here, were completely turned upside down. No more meeting and having booths like this, except a little bit for some organizations. But generally speaking, what has happened is we've seen the rise of remote, which is what we are doing today. When you have remote interpreting, you have new opportunities. As David mentioned, you're able to have a broader reach. And we've noticed that within IEK, we've held several events, and we were able to have people participate from all over the world. But you also have the problem, of course, of not being able to see each other and have a coffee together, etc. Afterwards. And much of the networking and the fun and the actual business gets done by chatting here and there in between meetings, right? So, and there's another problem. Well, most of you have something like this, an interpreter, whereas you saw the booth before, now you would see that the interpreter has something like this. I happen to have myself, that's a picture I found, but I have two large screens like that. I have a second computer to monitor what's happening, so on and so forth. So that's sort of the computer workstation for now, as long as the pandemic continues. During this crisis period, IEK, the International Association of Conference Interpreters, both at its central level and at USA level, has supported its members. Here in the US, we were part of an effort. We wrote to the Speaker of the House and to the President to ensure that we, as self-employed, were included in the package for self-employment benefits for the pandemic. We also maintained our training program, continued to train for various things, simultaneous, consecutive, also about taxes and how to figure out how to get this federal assistance. We held at least one major event where we had speakers from Europe and all over the world, actually, and speaking about this new world of remote, about how to deal with this new pandemic, and that was organized by us in IEK USA, and actually almost all the regions, the major regions, organized such events, and so you would have several, well, one or two a month, and it was very, very helpful to be a member of IEK and be able to gain all the insights and to learn from your colleagues so many things. I'd like to move on now to tell you about how you can organize your multilingual event. First and foremost, it's important to point out that studies have been carried out that show that when you require that non-English native speakers speak, all of them, English, your communication is worse than when you actually hire interpreters. You can use that QR code. As I said, I'll be showing a lot of QR codes. You can use this QR code, take a picture of it, and you can take a look at this research, this article here, that seems to show that quite clearly. When you are trying to organize anything, right? But right now we are talking about a multilingual event. You need to make a judgment about who you are going to hire. And here we see that there's always somebody cheaper. I thought that this was quite amusing because you can see that the person here has decided to go the cheap route, and it's not working out very well for him. So you want to have quality. Quality what? Well, there's three participants, three factors that I will mention, and I think that pretty much covers it. You need to have quality conference interpreters. Number two, you need to have good equipment if it's an on-site meeting. And you know, you've seen that ever since the Nuremberg trials in 1945, they've been developing hi-fi excellent equipment, and the quality of sound is superb. On the other hand, these days we are speaking over the internet, and sometimes the sound is not that great. And we will be talking about that. And you also, and this may be a bit of a surprise, you need to have quality participants. Of course, anyone, for example, you may say, well, our members are quality people. They wouldn't be invited otherwise. Yes, that's true for their own profession. But when it comes to speaking, sometimes they need a little bit of guidance, and I'd like to provide some of that today. Because if you don't have somebody who has a good microphone, etc., it's going to undermine your event. So let's talk about the first group here, which is conference interpreters. You can use this link, which is there in blue, or use the QR code that will direct you there if you want to take a picture of it, or show your camera, show it to your camera. Most smartphones will just take you directly to the site. And I would like to emphasize that there are many excellent conference interpreters who are not members of IEK. Nobody is saying otherwise. However, if a conference interpreter is a member of IEK, the person has gone through a selection process where, generally speaking, 3 or 4 colleagues to cover all of their languages have vouched in writing that this person is someone they would happily work with, and therefore that's something of a guarantee of quality. But you don't have to be a member. There are many, many great interpreters who are not members of IEK. However, if you are going to organize a conference, you must hire conference interpreters, if it is indeed a conference. So that is the part about the interpreters themselves. Let's go on now to look at the equipment, the platforms. As we saw earlier, the in-person one is like that. We see the booths, but what we are forced to do at this time is the second one, remote. Let's take a little bit closer look at remote. What you have is a platform such as Zoom we are using today. I'd like to point out that actually Zoom has added a high fidelity feature, which is very welcome, and I recommend that you try to find out a little bit more about it. It will help your participants to hear and also help the interpreters, which is so important. And the sound, the quality of the sound, now I'm going to dig in here, and because this is very serious. This is very serious. The sound needs to be compliant with standards that are set by the International Standards Organization. This organization has sat down over the decades with interpreters, with organizers, done many, many studies, and has figured out what is the minimum level of quality sound that simultaneous conference interpreters need. Well, it turns out that I have a piece of news for you today. None of the platforms today are compliant with these standards. Now, obviously, they've been caught. Well, we could say, maybe be generous and say they've been caught with a high demand, etc. And sort of everyone's rushing to use remote, but it's actually known how to do it. It can be done. Technically, it's not a problem. It's a matter of investment. These companies need to invest more and make the effort to provide better quality sound for interpreters. That's what I would like to say to you today. This is a problem not only for the quality of the interpreting that you will get, but it's also a problem for the interpreter's health and safety. So we will be taking a look at that a little bit later in my talk. So so we've talked about the interpreters, we've talked about the equipment and platforms, now the participants. How to make sure that you have a successful event at the level of your participants. Well, I imagine that what you want to have is people who sort of look like this, who look professional. They look like they've taken care. They have thought things through. They believe that this is a serious matter, and they are going to show up looking like they believe that. I'm sorry, I guess my sound is not working. It's very strange. I've got the button for computer sound press. I just check it again, but let's see if my sound works again. Here we have a video of somebody who is at home, like we are, doing what we are doing. And lo and behold, something happens, and so sad.
My apologies.
Were you able to hear that? Could somebody tell me in the chat, could you hear something?
Yes, we could hear it, David.
Okay, thank you. Since it was, let's play it again.
Pardon me. My apologies.
The poor guy. The first guy, you know, that could happen to any of us. I blurred out his face so that I didn't want to embarrass him. And the second one is a kid actually showing how you can really have terrible sound, but accidentally he's also having a terrible uh, view. People sometimes hold their phones and shake them around, and it's not professional, in my opinion. And I would like to emphasize this by showing you what this would be in an in-person meeting. If you went to a meeting and someone came in looking absolutely terrible, of course that person would be seen as unprofessional. And I would like to put across a point today, which is that if your sound is bad, you will come across as unprofessional. Now, I know that none of us are technicians, and we may not automatically have good microphones, but I also know that, you know, those people we saw earlier who looked so extremely professional and like professional speakers, they didn't have all of that in the beginning either, but they were making a career of being speakers on TV, and so they took the care to make sure that everything was right, that the guy had his tie on, that she was looking like a million bucks, and that they know how to speak. They care. And that's what our speakers and our participants need to do. They need to care about how they sound. And then there's more. You need to check and double check. Check your system, check your microphone, check your internet connection, run a couple of dummy Zoom meetings with your friends and ask, how do I sound, etc. Anybody can do this. It's a matter of caring and checking, and then you plan. Before a meeting, you will set up your whole thing and again, check it again with a friend or something, and make sure that it is working. So what I'm trying to say is that if you look a little bit.
That's how to make your microphone sound like a toaster, like you're talking into a mitten. That's it, basically.
Okay, so if your phone is shaking all around, you have no clue as to how you are fitting in the screen, and your sound is, sometimes you can figure out, for example, in this case, you could figure out what he's trying to say, but imagine trying to do that hour upon hour and trying to put it into another language. So I am trying to shame people actually into getting some good sound, because if you have bad sound, you look like that guy, the guy who walked in the meeting. You want to look like these guys, okay? You want to look like these guys. You want to have a good microphone or headset. If you buy a good headset, like I hope mine is, it comes with a good microphone and it maintains it at a good angle and a good distance from your mouth. Do not use your laptop microphone. Your laptop will make you sound, it's too far away and it tends to capture other things in the room, for example, the humming of your fan or anything else. Use a microphone that is either part of a headset or that is closer to your mouth. Do not use the microphone of your laptop. We recommend. Try to set up something that is stable and be sitting or standing still, not moving around. Also, make sure that your computer is, it's best to use a computer rather than a telephone, although phones can work if you keep them steady. However, you may have a hard time getting the right connection because sometimes the phone connection is not going to work all that well. And you should also use a Ethernet cable rather than Wi-Fi or a telephone connection, depending. These are some of the recommendations that I have for you if you want to be seen as someone who cares, someone who has said, hey, I want to see how this is going to work tomorrow for my meeting. I'm going to test it out. And then I'm going to plan. What if this happens? What if that happens? Then I'll use that computer. I have my backup computer, etc. So we've taken a look at quality of the conference interpreters, the equipment and the platforms. and the participants themselves. And to summarize, when you are looking for interpreters, you want trained career conference interpreters if it is a conference. For the equipment, you need to have top quality sound, and I'm going to be telling you a little bit more about that, why I say interpreters need top quality sound, and your participants need to be aware that this is business. This is, I'm sorry, I'm really kind of amazed. I see people attending meetings in their cars. I see people attending meetings on their bicycles. There's a famous story of someone attending a meeting on his tractor. And you get the feeling that these people are sort of showing off, but actually what they're doing is showing that they don't care. They don't care to present professionally, to be there the same way they would dressed up in a nice white shirt without any stains if they actually had an on-site meeting. So if you are looking for a good microphone or headset, in particular this list, which has been compiled by AIKE, you can use this QR code. Now, I'd like to move on to something that is very dear to my heart, which is related. Do the right thing. That sounds a little bit moralistic or something. But believe me, bear with me. I'm going to tell you something, and I'm going to try to put myself in your shoes. Because when somebody tells me something, generally speaking, I want to know why. And when I know why, that it just makes me feel, okay, now I believe it because this person has taken the trouble to explain to me why. So I'm going to tell you something which is interpreters need higher quality sound than the ordinary listener. And of course, you are going to ask why. If you are the owner of a platform or the organizer of an event, or maybe a sound technician, you're thinking, I can hear it. I can hear it. Fine. I can understand. And I'm going to tell you why what sounds fine to other people is not good enough for interpreters. First, and I'm going back to this idea of ISO compliant. You need to have ISO compliant sound. These standards are the ones that interpreters need for simultaneous interpretation. So again, why? I'm going to put myself in your shoes. You're thinking, are these people spoiled or what? Well, I'm going to tell you about two categories, auditory and cognitive, where interpreters face special obstacles specific to what they are trying to do. The first one is auditory, and that is the fact that you must hear above your own voice because we are speaking and listening at the same time. And believe me, we are also listening to our own voice. So we have these two inputs, our own voice and whatever is coming through our headset, and we need particularly good quality to separate them out. Let me give you a little example. If let's say a speaker has raised the volume of her speech because she really wants to emphasize a point, and I am going to be interpreting that part of the speech, 7 or 8, 10 seconds later, and let's say that I decide, I don't have to do this, but I might decide I am also going to use higher volume in order to emphasize a point. And so I am starting to speak into my microphone at a higher volume to emphasize this point, but she's already moved on to the part where she wants to contrast with what she just said, what she said at high volume. So she's saying something very quietly. Now I have to hear that very quiet thing above my own voice, which has, in order to get the message across, has adopted a higher level of volume. So you can see how this interplay of two sound inputs is problematic, and we do need higher quality sound because of that. So that's the first reason. It has to do with the sound that we are getting. We are getting two sounds, two sound feeds. Secondly, and there are two in this category, actually three, cognitive. Our mind is divided into three. The ordinary listener is pretty much sitting there and trying to just follow and of course, yes, analyzing and seeing what is pertinent, etc. But the main idea is just to take in what is being said. However, the interpreter has their brain power, their cognitive load is divided over 3 areas. First of all, the interpreter is figuring out what on earth the person is trying to say. Now, this is really what we do. This is very, sometimes extraordinarily difficult. Maybe you have had a hard time finding out what I'm trying to say sometimes, and it's just part of life, especially when someone is a high-level speaker and is explaining something that is important. It requires a lot of concentration. But I'm going to show you a little case where it's actually not all that complicated. This man made a video where he it's a joke where he says, under the pandemic, we will replace all explosive consonants like P with F so that the pandemic doesn't get spread by our spitting out little bits of virus. And it's sort of a joke, and I'll have you listen now. I hope you can hear it okay.
Anyone speaking to other people in a public place will have to stop using the plosive sound. Failure to do so could lead to a fine or even prison.
Okay, let's just take the end there. He says, failure to do so could lead to a fine or even prison. Well, all of us understand that it means prison. How do we understand that? Because we are thinking, we're dedicating some attention to that, figuring out what is going on. And when the sound is a little bit off, we dedicate more brain power to figuring out, okay, he said prison, but he means prison. Same thing here. Look at this. Number 1. Let's say that somebody says, let's have lunch at 12:30 a.m. Again, I'm thinking, well, I don't think she means let's have it in the middle of the night. So, okay, she just misspoke. I understand. This takes some brain power. So there really is a lot of cognitive load in figuring out what the person says. Number 2, formulating good output in the target language. Of course, this is what you get to hear the interpreter saying. And this is really hard. Have you ever tried doing this? You have to say what the person said and keep listening to what happens later. And of course, this takes many years. When I went to interpreting school, it was after I had my master's degree, and almost everybody else in interpreting school had already attained their master's degree. And it was really, and we just worked on how to be an interpreter for a couple of years. It's not easy. So we here have this second task of figuring out how to say what the person said in another language. Thirdly, we have to monitor what we say, just like I am monitoring what I say right now. If I say something off, which I have it, I think I just correct it. Well, interpreters are also listening. Hey, did I say what I meant to say? What they heard, is that actually communicating what the speaker said? This monitoring is going on all the time. So that's a third cognitive task that the interpreter is doing and that the ordinary listener is not doing. So here we have all 4 summed up. The first one is auditory. You have to hear above your own voice. Number 2, figuring out what the meaning of the speech is. Thirdly, expressing that meaning faithfully. And believe me, we are bending over backwards always to do that. And sometimes we do stupid things like turn up the volume in order to do that when there's bad sound. And number 4, monitor, make sure that what we're saying is working. So what happens when the sound is poor? Well, you will get poor output from the interpreter. We will not be able, in spite of all of our efforts, to provide the best quality that we always like to provide. But I'm also going to dig in a little bit on this second point, acoustic shock and related health issues. These problems have become a bit of an epidemic during the pandemic because remote has tripled the rate of injury to interpreters while they work. And here's my little image. I know an interpreter who said that she experienced an acoustic shock, and now she always has to ask her husband, are those actual bells ringing, or is it just ringing in my ears? That's pretty serious. Here we have a very recent report, only a few days ago, from Canada. And you can use that QR code and take a look at it. But I've taken the care to pull out a few pieces. Since the pandemic started, have you been injured at work while doing remote simultaneous interpreting? Almost 3/4 say yes. Have you fully recovered from your injuries? Almost half say no. There's another piece of a statistic, which is something that I did not copy for you, but it says that the rate, and I said it earlier actually, the rate of injury has tripled ever since the March last year because of remote. You're probably asking why. Remember I said I would try to put myself in your shoes. Well, the reason that people, interpreters get injured is that there may be very loud noises coming out that are explosive. And sometimes the reason for this is that the interpreter cannot get good quality sound and does something that we should never do, but we may do in spite of that, because we are trying so hard to deliver the message to you. They turn up the volume, and then a feedback comes or something, and that creates an injury. But there's also the fact that extended exposure to sound which has been degraded, as I said, none of the platforms have ISO compliant sound. So if you have sound that's been degraded by its passage from me to you over a system, that is over the long term will cause injury. There is a website that page that I created. You can see it here. It's called Save Your Ears, and that's the address, and there is the QR code. It's full of studies about this, and it includes the study I just showed you. So please help interpreters to provide accurate, faithful, and beautiful interpretation. This is what we love to do. But also help us to avoid pain, constantly ringing and hissing ears, headaches, loss of hearing, and some have even had loss of balance and things like that. And I can tell you that I have had a loss of hearing and I have ringing in my ears. Can't say that it was due to interpreting, but certainly it was a contributing factors. Speakers, when I said participants earlier, I meant anybody who's taking the microphone. Use a good headset with a good quality microphone. Use cable rather than Wi-Fi. Have a stable camera, not a phone that's shaking about. And make sure that you're in some place that is quiet. So far, I haven't had a dog or anybody run in here today. Why? Because I planned. I planned for that. Well, let's plan. Platforms, you need to up your game and give us ISO standards of sound. Conference organizers, demand the above of all your service providers, in particular that the speakers take care and that they have good microphones. Send them a microphone using all the mini services, the way we're always getting everything now, Amazon or whatever. I don't have stock in Amazon, but and demand that all of your speakers have a good microphone, and that they, if it's a platform, that they have good sound. Interpreters, insist on good sound. It's a matter of your hearing and your livelihood. And secondly, keep your volume as low as Christopher Thierry told me back in 1983, told the whole class. Keep your volume always at the lowest level you can, which still enables you to capture the entire message. So here we have covered all of these 7 points, and I think that I hope that I have helped you to have a successful multilingual event, and I hope that I have helped you to help us to give you a very successful multilingual event. And so that is the end of my talk. Thank you.